As we take a look at today's gospel passage, together with the reading from the book of Genesis, we're going to briefly review and look at the sacrament of holy matrimony. On the Tuesday night classes that I've started here, we'll consider the topic of marriage later on after the Christmas break. And in those classes in the month of January, there's 3 or 4 classes that we can consider in greater depth the sacrament of marriage. Now will be a brief review and, of course, keeping things age appropriate as well. So what is happening here? In this particular gospel passage of Mark, which is also we find in the Gospel of Matthew, these are the words that we need to focus on. Jesus says, "But from the beginning of creation." So there's a situation that's going on during the time of Moses. And that for your homework, you can go into the book of Exodus, the second book of the Bible. And basically, it's just that the people of God, the Jewish people of old, of the Old Testament, they weren't ready for what Jesus is now doing. Jesus comes and he brings things to a whole new level. And he establishes Christian marriage, and then makes marriage a sacrament, but from the beginning of creation. And then Jesus quotes the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible. So Jesus, being a practicing perfect Jew, a rabbi, a teacher, he knows the Old Testament, much of it by memory. And then he quotes the book of Genesis. "God made them male and female. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh." So Jesus is quoting from the second chapter of the book of Genesis. But to understand even in a deeper way the sacrament of marriage, we have to go a step further back to the first chapter of the book of Genesis. And what we need to do is look at who is God before we can consider what marriage is. Now, of course, God is mysterious. There's not a whole lot we can know because God is God. But there is something very interesting in the first chapter of the book of Genesis at verse 26. So it's towards the end of the first chapter of the book of Genesis. And we find these words. God said, "Let us make man in our own image, in the likeness of ourselves." So we have let us, our own, and the likeness of ourselves. Who's all these people we're talking about? God is only one God, right? But yet there's the plural, the use of the plural. Let us make man in our own image, in the likeness of ourselves. In these very words from the first chapter of the book of Genesis, verse 26, we see God revealing himself as a communion of persons, meaning the Blessed Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So God is referring to himself as an us, a communion of persons. Not 3 gods, 3 persons. Another mystery, okay? What this means then, that God in the act of creation is creating as a communion of persons. And so when he creates Adam, the first man, in his image, Adam on his own, the Bible says it's not good for man to be alone. Then we have the creation of Eve. So the very image of God, in the very image of God in man, the very image of man, is that man then becomes a community or a communion of persons through marriage, the sacrament of marriage, the first man and the first woman. Adam is not complete. He's not all together until the woman is created. Meaning then that this creation of man as male and female then is the fullness of human nature in communion, in community. And so then marriage then is the intimate communion of life and love between a man and a woman joined together by God. So the first step to understand what marriage is to go back to the very first chapter of Genesis and see how God reveals himself as an intimate communion of persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who then creates man as a communion of persons, male and female. When we then open up the Catechism of the Catholic Church, we then take a look in summary, and we'll do this in January, the purposes of marriage. What is marriage all about? Well, there are, in the teaching and the magisterium of the Catholic Church, there are 3 purposes of marriage, and these purposes are all equal. Some have tried to make the argument that one of these purposes is superior to the others. The teaching of the Church is that these 3 purposes go together. Purpose number 1, the good of the spouses. We'll explain what that is in a moment. The procreation of children, that's easy to understand. And then the education of children. So the children aren't just, cows, chickens, and lambs out there. We're just watering and feeding them. They need to be educated, right? In all aspects, right? Right from the beginning of conception, there's an educational process that goes on that is the responsibility of the parents. The school system assists the parents. The church, the parish, with the CCD program and other programs, assist the parents. But the parents are the primary educators of their children. The other institutions, whether it's the school system or the church, assist the parents, but they don't supplant the parents. So the purposes of marriage are the good of the spouses, the procreation of children, and the education of children. The good of the spouses, well, what are we talking about here? This is a general term for all that's good about marriage. Like, for example, friendship, community, a home, a family, having money coming into the house, right? All of these things, happiness, even the physical, intimate life of a man and a woman is good. This is all good, the good of the spouses. The church is not against sex. What the church is saying, because of the Bible, because of what God reveals about human sexuality and family life, is that this intimate life between a man and a woman takes place within the sacrament of marriage, and that the family is the very base of society. John Paul II always used to say that as the family goes, so does society. One of the many things that I like now about my new surroundings here in San Diego is that it's noticeable that the family unit here is very much intact compared to other parts of the country. And that's good. And that's very commendable. And it needs to be preserved. We can't allow the clamors of the world to change our values. One of the most important values of the Hispanic culture is family. And don't ever forget that. So the purposes of marriage are the good of the spouses, the procreation of children, and the education of children. The characteristics then, if you will, if you want to call it, the characteristics of marriage, certain bullet points here that are important to understand, is that marriage is exclusive, and we'll talk about that in a moment, indissoluble, which Jesus is talking about in today's gospel passage, faithful, and open to the procreation of children. Exclusive meaning that for Christians, we're not polygamous, right? We're not in some village somewhere in the middle of nowhere and the guy's got 20 wives. No, that doesn't work. It's one man and one woman, okay? Indissoluble, meaning until death do you part. It's a commitment made before God, in God, with God, forever. Faithful, faithful to each other. Of course, that takes, a lot of commitment, a lot of prayer, many times a lot of abnegation or mortification. And then open to the procreation of children. What makes a marriage valid is the consent, number one. So the couple stands here before the priest and says, I do. I always say that the best marriage preparation is the girl needs to understand, the I do and the implications of that. What the guy needs to know is there he says, I do and yes, dear. And so once he understands the yes, dear part of it, he's all set. Very successful marriage. But seriously, it's the I do. And the I do is pronounced in the marriage vows. The I do must be free of pressure. So there can't be anything of like being somebody forced to get married. Free of pressure and impediments. It must be without conditions, forever, faithful, and open to life. The I do is an act of the will to enter into a lifelong covenant of love. This total and free gift of each to the other, expressed in the exchange of the marital vows, comes to fulfillment in the consummation of their yes through the gift of themselves to each other in the marital act. The act of consummation is a profound expression of giving their entire beings, body and soul, to each other in the marital embrace of love. So this is important to understand as we look at different challenges that families may deal with marriage. So let's take a look then as a practical conclusion of all of these points of what marriage is according to the Bible, and of course the Catholic Church is receiving this revelation of God and then guarding it, conserving it, and teaching it. Then what are some difficulties and challenges? Research shows 5 alarming facts about modern day culture. 1, couples who live together before marriage have higher separation and divorce rates. Doesn't mean that's 100%. It means statistically there are higher numbers. 2, couples who live together before marriage have unhappier marriages. Statistically, not 100%. Couples who are sexually active before marriage are much more likely to divorce. Couples who have had premarital sex are more likely to have extramarital affairs as well. And couples who live together are likely to have a fleeting romance rather than a permanent relationship. Research has shown that even the brain knows the difference. If you have a couple that's merely living together outside of the sacrament of marriage, then research shows that the brain is under constant stress. Well, why is that? Because you can wake up the next day and everybody's gone. There's no commitment. There's always the back door where I'm out of here. Marriage sometimes is difficult in our modern day culture because marriage in the Catholic Church, a sacramental marriage, is demanding a lifelong commitment. Another challenge is that even though a couple may be very serious about their marriage, just some things happen that unfortunately, things just unravel. They don't work out. Things are discovered later on. And we all know, different stories, and I'm sure maybe some of you have been through some difficulties that are very sad and very difficult to deal with. Of course, the church looks upon this always with a sense of kindness and of mercy and of reaching out. Nobody's here to judge anybody. Sometimes that the church, in the teaching of Jesus, it's a very demanding teaching that prohibits divorce. But sometimes there are cases where marriages just simply don't work out for whatever reason. So that's where in our modern times we see the church reaching out and trying to heal through the annulment process. And what the annulment is saying through an investigation is that moment of the I do in front of the altar, even though it was said in word, never really took place. There was some kind of impediment there, and that's what the process looks like. And then in January, when we come together, we can look at different examples of things that happen. Like for example, if somebody deep down inside is making there's all sorts of stories. I'm sure maybe some of you know some stories as well of things that happen. Somebody's high on drugs while they're being married. I mean, there's no marriage there. There's no full consent there. Somebody's been drinking the night before and he or she, they're incapable of making any kind of vows. Sometimes there's an intention of saying, well, I'm getting married, but I'm not going to have children. I mean, that's not a valid marriage either. Not that you can't or can have children, but this intention that I'm not going to give my spouse children. No, the right to children is a part of the sacrament of marriage. So there's all sorts of things that's what the annulment process looks at, okay? That full and free consent didn't take place. So it's not a Catholic divorce. It's just saying that something happened, and then that's the reason why things happened. They turned out that way. And so, as difficult as that process can be for people and for families, then it's the role of the pastor at a church, then, and for the Catholic Church in general, to always reach out to people with great kindness and with great compassion, because the church is not here to complicate life. The church is here to help people have successful families and get to heaven. Then the other difficulty is kind of a cultural, I guess I would call it, in my opinion, in my experience of 20, now going on 21 years in South Texas, there's a cultural mentality about marriage. So, like, I'm not going to get married because I don't have my confirmation, or I'm not going to get married because I don't have my first communion, or we're living together because I haven't gotten my confirmation yet. That's all crazy. That's like, I'm still living together, not getting married because I didn't light 5 candles over there in church. That mentality, I don't know where that comes from, okay? So here's the bottom line. To get married, you don't need anything. You don't even have to be baptized. You could have a special permission from the bishop to be married without baptism, okay? What do you need to be married? That's why this thing about going through all these hoops for marriage preparation and this class and that class, look, let's start over. What do you need? You need to love each other. That's it. If you love each other and you're going to make a commitment to live forever and have a family, what else? That's it. What else am I going to tell you? I can help you. I said, here's a book that I suggest. It's very good. Read it. We can discuss it. But if you love each other and you're making a commitment to live forever until death do you part, that's it. And the best teachers for that would be your own mother and father and your grandparents and your own family and your uncles and your aunts and your cousins. That's why the family is the best mentors, the best teachers of what family life is all about. Usually, it's supposed to be that way. So, and then you don't have to go spending all sorts of money on a wedding either. So, and I've also seen here, which is good, that, you could get married young as well. That's the whole purpose. That's the original purpose behind a quinceañera. Now, I'm not advocating that girls get married at 15, but historically they did. And maybe some of your grandparents did, because that was just something that was done a long time ago. The real meaning behind a quinceañera is that the girl is coming to the church with her family to give thanks to God for the gift of life, but also after Mass and then during the fiesta and after the brindis, the father is saying to the little town that his daughter is now eligible for marriage. And usually, like in Mexico or even here, there's been stories, about on the ranches and stuff like that, that when a young girl would get married, the guy was usually a little older, in his low 20s, already had a job, had money, he could support a family, and it made sense for women to get married young because working the ranches in the agricultural society, well, then families wanted workers. And so you'll see in Mexico, it's typical, like you go throughout Jalisco and Michoacan and Guanajuato, a lot of the families that are here in South Texas from Mexico, they all come from families of 15 or 16 kids, because the more kids they had, the more workers they had. It was a built-in economy. They may not have said that, but that's what was going on within the culture. It's an agricultural society. So the more kids, the better. They can all work the farm, milk the cows, take care of the chickens. It makes perfect sense. So there's nothing wrong with getting married young. In fact, in my personal view, if you're ready, adelante. Have at it. Move forward. Don't be waiting. And of course, the best preparation for marriage is your own family. Your mom, your dad, your grandparents, the stories that you tell in the kitchen, at the table. And of course, like we said, there are difficulties. I could see some faces here. Some people are saying, Father, it's very easy to say what you're saying because you're not married. Okay, but I'm a priest and I do come from a family, and I also deal with families all the time. So I know there are stories that sometimes are difficult, but that's where love comes in, that's where forgiveness comes in, that's where healing comes in, and we've got to move on, particularly about forgiveness, right? It's like, for example, a little fun, I was thinking if I should use this or not, and here we'll conclude, a little funny story about Jose and Maria, a couple in Mexico, young, and they're going to get married in a couple of weeks, and they go out to dinner before they're going to get married. And Maria was a very conservative, traditional type of Catholic girl, very religious. And Jose was, he was just going along for the ride in terms of his faith. He would tag along with church, but he wasn't that serious. So Maria comes home after the dinner, and her mother's there in the living room, and Maria starts bawling her eyes out, and the mother says, "What's the matter?" And so Maria says, "Jose, he no believe in hell." And the mother says, "Don't worry, once he marries you, he'll believe in hell, for sure." So life is very real. Marriage is not an easy vocation. It takes, as you all know, all of you have been married for a long time, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of patience and love and forgiveness and starting over and over and to work on it. And that's what the pastor is. The pastor is the shepherd for his people. So whenever you have issues or problems, you come talk to the priest and say, what do we do? What advice can you give us? Right? And that's the purpose of the parish, is to help the people, not to complicate people's lives. So today is a very beautiful set of readings from both the Gospel of Mark and the book of Genesis on the sacrament of marriage. From the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate.